It all started with a desperate need for quiet, the kind of deep silence you can only find far away from the constant hum of city life. So when I inherited my uncle's old place in a speck-on-the-map town called Cedar Hollow, Texas, I packed my life into a few boxes and drove south without a second thought. The landscape flattened out into dry scrub and endless sky, and the town itself appeared like a mirage, a cluster of low buildings baking under the oppressive sun. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business, but they had a way of looking right through you if you were new. The house was exactly as I remembered it from one childhood summer. A simple box of faded white clapboard with a porch that sagged in the middle. It smelled of dust and old wood, a smell that felt like peace. The first few days were uneventful. I unpacked, bought groceries at the lone supermarket where the cashier stared a little too long, and tried to settle into the sluggish rhythm of the place. The silence I had craved was there, but it was heavier than I expected. A thick blanket that seemed to smother sound rather than just absent it. The first hint that something was off came on my third evening. I was taking a walk as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. An old man was meticulously bringing in his ceramic garden gnomes, not just placing them in the shed, but wrapping each one in a dark cloth before carrying it inside. I gave him a nod, and he stopped dead, his eyes wide. "You need to get inside, son," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "The rules start at sundown. You best learn them." He then hurried inside without another word, locking his door with a loud, final click. I shrugged it off, thinking he was just eccentric. But the next day, I found a single sheet of paper slipped under my front door. It was a list, typed on an old typewriter. The letters faint and uneven. The headings simply read, "For your safety." The rules were bizarre, nonsensical. Things like never leave a light on in an empty room after dark. If you hear a dog barking in the distance, do not go outside to investigate. If your reflection seems to move on its own, break the mirror immediately. Always leave a bowl of water on your back porch before you go to sleep. And the last one, underlined, no matter what you hear, do not, under any circumstances, look out the windows between the hours of 2 o'clock and 2:15 in the morning. I laughed, assuming it was a prank. A weird welcome wagon tradition for the new guy. I crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash. That night, I stayed up late reading, a single lamp casting a warm pool of light in the living room. Around midnight, I heard it, a faint barking. It was far away, probably from one of the farms on the edge of town. It was a lonely, desperate sound, and despite the rule popping into my head, I felt a pull to go to the door, just to listen. I didn't go out, but I did stand by the front window, peering into the inky blackness. I saw nothing, but the barking stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like a physical pressure on my eardrums. The next morning, old Mrs. Gable, from across the street, was standing at my fence, her face pale and tight with anger. "You had a light on," she accused, pointing a bony finger at my living room window, "and you were at the window after dark. Are you trying to get us all taken?" I tried to explain, to ask what she meant, but she just shook her head and walked away, muttering about fools from the city. That was when the unease really set in. It wasn't just one odd old man, it was the whole town. I started noticing things. Every house had blackout blinds, not flimsy curtains, but heavy, industrial-grade blinds. Every porch had a small, plain bowl, like a dog bowl. But I never saw a single dog in Cedar Hollow, not one. I decided to follow the rules, not out of belief, but out of a desire to not attract any more attention. It was easier to just go along with it. That night, I turned off all the lights I wasn't using. I filled a mixing bowl with water and left it on the back porch, feeling ridiculous, and I made sure to be in bed well before 2 in the morning. But I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, the house creaking around me, my mind racing. The digital clock on my bedside table glowed a faint red, 1:58 a.m. The house was silent, too silent, like the world was holding its breath. 2 o'clock a.m. And then I heard it, a sound so low and deep, it was more a vibration than a noise. It started softly, a hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, from the very ground beneath the house. It grew steadily, not in volume, but in intensity. It was a wrong sound, a sound that should not exist. It felt ancient and hungry, and it made my bones ache. My heart was pounding in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. The rule screamed in my head, "Do not look out the windows," but the urge was overwhelming, a primal need to see the source of that terrible noise, to put a face to the fear. I clutched the blankets, my knuckles white, squeezing my eyes shut. I could feel it out there, something moving, something vast. I could sense a presence, a shadow blotting out the starlight. The humming vibration reached a peak, a resonance that made my teeth rattle. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was even worse, a void where sound used to be. I lay there, trembling, drenched in a cold sweat, until the first rays of sun pierced the cracks in the blinds. The next day, the town was normal. People went about their business under the bright Texas sun. But I saw the subtle signs now, the tiredness in their eyes, the way they never quite smiled. I went to the small town library, a dusty room that smelled of old paper. The librarian, a severe woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, watched me as I browsed. I found the local history section, a single shelf. Most of the books were about pioneer families or the geology of the region, but one thin volume, bound in cracked leather with no title, caught my eye. I took it to a table. The pages were brittle and yellowed, filled with handwritten accounts. It was a journal, started in the late 1800s. The entries told a story. The founding of Cedar Hollow was smooth, but then people started vanishing, only one or two a year. Always after dark, always without a trace. The town was ready to abandon the place when a preacher arrived. A man who claimed to understand the old things, the things that lived in the empty spaces. He said the land itself was hungry, and that something old slept beneath it, something that stirred in the deepest part of the night. He instituted the rules, a bargain, a ritual of appeasement, the lights off so as not to attract attention, the water left as an offering, the avoidance during its time of passing, and most importantly, the never looking, because to see it was to be seen by it, and to be seen was to be chosen. The journal entries became sparse, just notes confirming the rules worked. As long as they were followed, the town was left mostly alone. The hunger was kept at bay. I closed the book, my hands shaking. It was all real. The fear in that journal was palpable. A century of whispered terror passed down through generations. That night, I followed the rules with a new, grim determination. The bowl of water was placed with reverence. The lights were extinguished with care. When 2 a.m. came, I was awake, listening. The humming started again. That same deep, resonant frequency that felt like it was scraping the inside of my skull. This time, I didn't just feel fear. I felt a morbid curiosity. What was it? What did it look like? The urge to look was a physical itch behind my eyes. But the warning in the journal was clear. To see it was to be seen. I pressed my face into the pillow and waited for it to pass. Days turned into weeks, and the ritual became my new normal. A strange, fearful dance I performed every sunset. The town folks warmed up to me slightly, seeing that I was complying. But they never spoke of it directly. It was the town's great unspoken truth, the price they paid for living on this particular patch of earth. Then, one Tuesday, everything changed. I had a long day driving to the next big town for supplies. I was exhausted. I fell into a deep sleep as soon as it got dark. A sudden, sharp crack of thunder jolted me awake. A storm had rolled in. Lightning flashed, illuminating my room for a split second. And in that instant, I saw the digital clock, 2:07 a.m. Panic seized me. I had forgotten the bowl of water, the offering. I lay frozen, listening. The storm raged outside, wind howling, rain lashing against the windows, but underneath it all, I could hear the hum. It was different tonight, sharper, agitated. It sounded angry. Then I heard a new sound, a scraping, like something heavy being dragged across my wooden porch. My blood ran cold. It was at my house. It knew. The scraping stopped right outside my bedroom window. The humming was so loud now, it felt like my head would split open. And then, a tap, a single, gentle tap on the glass. My entire body went rigid. Don't look, don't look, don't look, the mantra repeated in my head. But my eyes, betraying me, slowly drifted towards the window. The blinds were down, but there was a small gap at the bottom. A sliver of space, the tapping came again, more insistent, and then I saw it, a shape, just a fragment of something. Through that gap, it wasn't a shape I could process. It was long and pale, like a finger, but the joints were all wrong. It bent in places where no finger should bend, and the color was not a living color. It was the white of something that had never seen the sun. It tapped once more, and then was gone. The humming receded, fading back into the earth. The storm seemed to quiet down as well. As if relieved, I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the corner of my room, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the window. The morning after the tapping was the hardest dawn I have ever faced. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and deceptively bright. Sunlight glittered off the wet grass, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. A scent that should have been refreshing, but instead felt like a mockery. I forced my body to move, my legs feeling like they were made of wet sand. Each step a conscious effort against a weight that wanted to pin me to the bed forever. The house was silent, the only sound the frantic thumping of my own heart, a drumbeat of residual terror. I had to know. I had to see what, if anything, was left behind. Pushing the front door open, the hinges groaning a complaint that echoed in the stillness, I stepped onto the porch. The wooden planks were slick with rainwater, gleaming in the early light. I scanned the area, my eyes darting over every inch, expecting to find deep scratches, gouges in the wood, some tangible proof of the nightmare. But there was nothing. The porch was untouched, pristine, as if the storm and the thing that came with it had been nothing but a bad dream. A fragile, foolish hope began to bloom in my chest, a desperate desire to believe it had all been in my head, a product of stress and suggestion from that crazy journal. Then I looked at the window, my bedroom window, and there it was. The hope died instantly, crushed under a cold, sharp reality. On the glass, right at the height where I had seen that pale, wrong shape, was a smudge. It wasn't mud, not a splash from the rain. It was a greasy, translucent mark, like a film of oil left by a hand. I moved closer, my breath catching in my throat. The mark was unmistakable. It was a print, but it was not a human hand. The fingers, if you could call them that, were far too long and slender, stretching out from a palm shape that was too narrow. And there were too many of them, the impressions overlapping in a way that suggested not 5 digits, but 6 or maybe 7. All of them possessing those impossible bends in the wrong places. I could see the faint whorls and lines of a texture that was not skin. I stood there, frozen, staring at the evidence. It was real. It had been real. It had touched my house, it had touched the glass separating me from it, and it had left its mark. A wave of nausea washed over me, so strong I had to grip the porch railing to stay upright. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This was not a town of eccentrics. This was a town of survivors, and I had just failed my first real test. I stumbled back inside, my mind racing, and returned with a bottle of glass cleaner and a roll of paper towels. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely spray the cleaner. The foam dripped down the glass, obscuring the mark for a moment. I scrubbed, not with care, but with a frantic, desperate energy, grinding the paper towel into the pane as if I could erase not just the smear, but the memory itself. I scrubbed until my arm ached and the paper towel was shredded. I leaned in close, my nose almost touching the cold glass, inspecting it. It was clear. Physically, it was perfectly clean. But I could still see the ghost of it in my mind, a perfect, haunting negative burned onto my retinas. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep into my bones, that I would always see it there. From that moment on, life in Cedar Hollow transformed completely. The quaint, quiet town I had moved to was gone, replaced by a gilded cage. The rules were no longer a strange custom I humorously followed. They were a lifeline, a fragile thread keeping me from falling into an abyss I had only glimpsed. And I had frayed that thread. I had drawn attention to myself. The constant, low-grade anxiety I had felt before was now a full-blown state of hypervigilance. I started seeing things. Not full-bodied apparitions, but movements at the very edge of my vision. A shadow would dart from one side of the room to the other, but when I snapped my head towards it, there was nothing, just ordinary furniture in the afternoon sun. Outside, a dark shape would flit between trees, too tall and thin to be a person. Vanishing the instant I tried to focus on it. It was like living with a persistent afterimage, a world just out of sync with our own. The reflections were the worst. I would walk past a dark window at night and see my own reflection, but it would seem to lag a half second behind, its movements not quite matching my own. Sometimes, I would catch it staring back at me with an expression I knew I wasn't making, a look of cold curiosity. I started avoiding mirrors, covering the television screen when it was off, anything that could potentially show me something I didn't want to see. I began to truly understand the people in town now. The tiredness in their eyes wasn't just from early mornings or hard work. It was the fatigue of constant, unending vigilance. It was the exhaustion that comes from living with a predator you can never see, but you know is always there, just beyond the circle of light, patient and ancient and hungry. They carried the weight of that knowledge every minute of every day, and it showed in the slump of their shoulders, the way they never truly relaxed, even in the safety of the day. Sleep offered no refuge. My dreams became vivid, terrifying journeys. I would find myself in vast, dark spaces underground, caverns so large I could not see the ceilings, filled with the smell of wet stone and something older, something metallic and cold. I could feel a presence there, something immense sleeping in the darkness, a consciousness so vast and alien it could not be comprehended. And in these dreams, I knew that this thing was now vaguely aware of me. I was a new speck of light in its immense darkness, a tiny, buzzing irritation it had registered. The journal's words echoed in my waking hours, a grim prophecy. Once it sees you, it will not forget. It will wait. The confirmation of that waiting came a week later. I was taking out the trash, forcing myself to perform normal chores in an attempt to cling to some semblance of a routine. As I rounded the corner to the back porch, I stopped dead. There, placed neatly in the center of the top step, was a dead sparrow. It was perfectly intact, its feathers smooth and unruffled. There wasn't a single drop of blood, no visible wound. But its head was twisted completely around, facing backwards in a way that made my own neck ache in sympathy. Its eyes were open, glassy and blank, reflecting the sky. And right next to it, the bowl I had religiously filled with water every night since the incident was empty. Not just empty, but bone dry, as if it had been baked in an oven for hours. The water hadn't been spilled. It had been taken, or it had simply ceased to exist. That was the final message. It was not just aware of me, it was marking my house. It was letting me know that the simple offering was no longer enough. I had been promoted from an anonymous resident to a person of interest. The peace I had come to Cedar Hollow to find was a lie, a fragile truce built on fear and ritual. I was no longer a bystander, a newcomer who could observe from a distance. I was a participant, an active player in this terrible game, and I had drawn the attention of the only other player that mattered. The decision to leave was instantaneous and absolute. I couldn't stay. Every second spent in that house felt like a countdown. I packed my car in the middle of the day, my movements hurried and clumsy. I didn't care what the neighbors thought anymore. Their strange rules had become my reality, and that reality was now hunting me. As I threw the last box into the backseat, I glanced across the street. The old man who had first warned me was standing at his window, the heavy blackout blind pulled aside just enough for him to see out. He wasn't glaring or shaking his head in disapproval. He was just watching. And for the first time, I saw something in his expression other than fear or anger. It was pity. A deep, profound sadness that seemed to weigh down his entire face. He knew. He knew what it meant to be seen, and he knew that leaving wouldn't change anything. That look chilled me more than any midnight sound ever could. I got in the car and drove, not looking back. As Cedar Hollow disappeared from my rearview mirror, shrinking into the vast Texas landscape, I felt a profound sense of relief. It was a physical sensation, like a cord that had been pulled taut around my chest had finally been cut. I could breathe again. The farther I drove, the lighter I felt. By the time I checked into a cheap motel 100 miles away, I was almost convinced I had escaped. The room was bland and anonymous, the perfect antidote to the oppressive uniqueness of Cedar Hollow. I ordered a pizza, watched mindless television, and tried to convince myself that it was over. That night, exhausted from the drive and the emotional turmoil, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. But I was jolted awake, not by a sound, not by a nightmare, but by a sudden internal alarm. The room was pitch black and utterly silent. My eyes went straight to the digital clock on the nightstand. Its numbers glowed the same faint, hellish red, 2:00 a.m. My heart immediately began to hammer against my ribs. I lay there, straining my ears. There was no deep humming, no vibration through the floor. The motel was quiet. But the compulsion was there, an irrational, powerful urge to get out of bed, to walk to the window, and to look out. To see if the world outside this room was still the world I remembered, or if something had followed me. I fought it, clenching my fists in the sheets, squeezing my eyes shut. I recited the rules in my head, the ones that no longer applied to a place, but to me. Do not look. The fear had followed me. It wasn't tied to Cedar Hollow, to that specific patch of hungry land. I realized this with a sickening dread that made my stomach roll. It was tied to me. I had broken the one rule that truly mattered. I had looked. I had met its gaze, even if only for a fractured second through a slit in the blinds. And in that moment, a connection had been made. A line had been drawn from it to me. Now, no matter where I go, when the world grows quiet and the clock ticks over to that terrible hour, I can feel it. It's not a sound, not a vibration I can hear. It's a feeling, a subtle pressure in the air, a faint resonance deep in the earth that only I seem to notice. It is a patient, waiting presence and attention that is now permanently fixed on me. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that it is still watching. It is not in a hurry. It has all the time in the world, and it is only a matter of time before it decides to stop watching and finally come to collect what it saw.